Because my worship is for real. Sing you don't know my story. All the things that I've been through. You can't feel my pain. All I had to go through to get here. You'll never understand my praise. You'll never understand my praise. Don't try to figure it out. Because my worship is for real. Because my worship is for real. I've been through too much not to worship. 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 Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. My worship is for real. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. My worship is for real. Lord, I love you. Lord, I love you. Lord, I love you. My worship is for real. My worship is for real. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. My worship is for real. Hallelujah. 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 My worship is for real. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. My worship is for real. Yes, yes,
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kai Stevens, and I am the director of the Alabama Prison Arts and Education Project at Auburn University. And for 20 years, we have offered arts and educational programming inside state prisons here in Alabama. In 2017, we were able to build the first ever Bachelor of Science degree program inside of a prison. And we currently have 35 Auburn University students earning an interdisciplinary studies degree. I'm very excited to be able to share that next Tuesday, we are starting that degree program at the Tutwiler Prison for Women. And so now we will be able to offer that opportunity to women as well. People are often very interested in how this program got started. It was a little bit of a fluke of the universe. I am from the state of Alabama. I moved back here after graduate school and was very fortunate to receive a fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts to teach poetry. And that opportunity was made for me at the Talladega Federal Prison. And what I found inside of the classroom space there were human beings who wanted to write poetry and who loved poetry. And the urgency in creating and communicating and expression was unlike anything I had been around in higher education. And I was very drawn to that. Very shortly after that experience, I was able to start teaching at the Tutwiler Prison for Women, and that's really when this program was born. So 20 years later, we're doing another start at Tutwiler. One of the things about our program that I would really like to center on for at least a couple of minutes is how we step into this work. The Alabama Department of Corrections and most departments of corrections and a lot of things having to do with programs for people inside is really centered on language of corrections, recidivism, wanting to make a safer state. We we don't really use that language. We invest in educational and art spaces because human beings need educational and art spaces. And if someone takes classes from us and it impacts them and it helps contribute to their life once they are released, that is wonderful. But we are not in charge of that. They are in charge of that. And it's really my call to action in some ways is to really focus on the language that we use for any group of people that seems to be othered, that there doesn't have to be an exceptionalism. We don't ask people at Auburn University when they come in as a student on the main campus if their degree is gonna, have a similar effect as one expects for recidivism. So why should we do that for our students inside? We really focus on making an open space and an accepting space where someone who feels at risk and vulnerable can come in and be surrounded by a community of learners and thinkers and to find as much warmth as one can possibly find inside of a prison system that is a pretty challenging task to undertake. But I want to come back to one of the things that, and I really appreciated the opening performance that we had with the You Don't Know My Story. Most of the people that we have interacted with our program over all of these years, and we've had over 5,000 students at this point, hundreds and hundreds of semester length classes. Um, One of the unifying things that I've seen through all of this is that people do not feel like they are seen and they do not feel like they are heard. And I am often motivated by the question of how do we become all that we can become if no one sees us or acknowledges us or listens to our story and understands all the things that have influenced the pathway to wherever we are. And that a singular event is not the defining moment of a person's identity and life. I'm really excited to be here today, and I am most hopeful that this becomes a springboard for building some relationships and partnerships with social work at the University of Alabama. We would love to have students and faculty work with our program and with our students to help make opportunities for people to become, to see possibility in themselves, and to have allies and a community that identify them as human being first, not an incarcerated person first. So I'm really, really thrilled to be here. I appreciate your invitation, and I'm really looking forward to learning from everyone today. Thank you so much. And I believe next up is Elizabeth Prophet.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Prophet, and as the president of the Undergraduate Social Work Organization and a sophomore in the BSW program, I have the distinguished honor of welcoming you all to the 33rd annual Dr. Ethel H. Hall African American Heritage Month celebration. I want to extend my gratitude to the family of Dr. Ethel Hall, Dean Hatcher, and each of our online audience members for attending today's celebration. I also want to take a moment to congratulate Dr. Shanavia Hatcher for her newly assumed position as Dean. She is the School of Social Work's first Black woman to serve as Dean in our school's 54-year history. Although COVID-19 has once again disrupted our ability to gather in person together, it will not prevent us from celebrating the legacy of Dr. Ethel Hall. Originally born in Decatur, Alabama, Dr. Hall was the first African American female to serve as vice president of the Alabama State Board of Education, where she served 10 consecutive terms. Dr. Hall received her bachelor's degree from Alabama A&M University and master's degrees from the University of Chicago and Atlanta University. She was a member of the first group of students to obtain a doctorate in social work from the University of Alabama. Dr. Hall went on to teach as an associate professor at both the University of Montevallo and the University of Alabama. After 23 years of representing Board District 4, Dr. Hall was honored with the title of Vice President Emerita in 2004. Dr. Hall held positions with the Education Commission of the States, the Governor's Commission on Instructional Improvement and Academic Excellence, and the National Commission on Teaching in America's Future. In addition to her work with the state of Alabama, Dr. Hall served her community on the board of directors for the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, the National Conference of Community and Justice, the Women's Exchange, the Birmingham Museum of Art, and the Alabama Archives and History Foundation. Dr. Hall is the recipient of more than 200 honors and awards, including being named by the Birmingham Business Journal as one of the top 10 women making a difference. In 1999, she was awarded the Distinguished Service Award by the National Association of State Boards of Education. Dr. Hall authored a book in 2010 titled My Journey, a memoir of the first African American to preside over the Alabama Board of Education. As we celebrate the life and legacy of Dr. Ethel Hall today, may we leave with a renewed sense of energy for activism, a heart for service, and an intention to impact the communities we encounter and inhabit. Thank you again for joining us, and I will now turn it over to Ms. Shayla Smith.
Welcome to the 33rd Annual Dr. Ethel Hall African American Heritage Month Colloquium. It's the School of Social Work signature event where we highlight social justice, civil rights, and their connectedness to social work. This year, I am pleased Ms. Kemba Smith Pradia will offer a timely message about the urgent need for criminal justice reform for women who are incarcerated. The Alabama prison system is currently in a state of crisis. Alabama is being sued by the U.S. Department of Justice because overcrowding, underfunding, and understaffing has led to unsafe living conditions and a lack of basic health care and mental health treatment. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, women have unique needs in part due to the higher rate at which they are survivors of abuse or trauma and their responsibility for children. During a time when the patterns of disproportionate impacts of tough on crime approaches have led to ineffective resolutions, our work on addressing the systemic underpinnings of criminal justice reforms becomes more important than ever to advocate for progressive policies that offer gender-informed approaches and community-based alternative sentencing for nonviolent offenders. I encourage you to prepare yourself to embrace this wonderful celebration of African American heritage and this powerful message as we continue to take strides to rise to meet the challenges of the day. And now I'm very excited to welcome Dean Hatcher to the virtual podium and to especially note that this is her first time attending our event as the Dean of the School of Social Work. Welcome, Dean Hatcher.
Thank you, Shayla. Good morning. I am Shanavia Smith Hatcher, and it is an absolute pleasure to provide greetings to you as Dean of the School of Social Work here at the University of Alabama. On behalf of the school, I'm honored to welcome each of you to the 33rd annual Dr. Ethel H. Hall African American Heritage Month celebration. As a native of Selma, a city synonymous with our most revered civil rights heroes and their pursuits of justice, equality, and equity, it is humbling to be part of a program that honors one of our state's most treasured heroes, Dr. Ethel H. Hall, a bastion of unity and a champion of public education. It's a privilege to welcome the members of Dr. Ethel Hall's family who have joined us here today as well. Dr. Ethel Hall's legacy of community activism and her commitment to social justice lives on in this event. Given my practitioner and research background, and on the cusp of Social Work Month next month, I am also particularly excited to welcome my Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated soror, our keynote speaker, Ms. Kemba Smith Pradia, and look forward to her sharing about reimagining criminal justice and changing the narrative. For 33 years, this event has provided the opportunity for members of our school and the social work community to reflect on what it takes for each of us to do, as our Chief Diversity Officer, Shayla Smith, said. She called on us to do just a moment ago and move the needle of progress forward toward a racially and socially just society, despite the roadblocks in place in our path. Thank you for joining us virtually today. It is indeed a very different event than what has been done in the past, but one legacy of this pandemic will be a different way of communicating and engaging each other. In fact, if you take a moment and scroll across your screen, you are engaging with over 150 people today who have logged on to join us and do this work. That is what is important. So thank each of you for being here today. I will now turn the virtual podium over to one of our Doctoral of Social Work students, Mr. Charles Banks, to share with you more about the namesake of this event, Dr. Ethel H. Hall. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Charles Banks Jr. I'm a doctoral student here at the University of Alabama School of Social Work, and I'll be introducing our Ethel Hall reflection video. The late Dr. Ethel H. Hall was a community and public education activist who served as Alabama's first African-American vice president of the State Board of Education, a position she held for 23 years. She was known for her commitment to education access and her deep passion for her community. The University of Alabama School of Social Work honors her role in Black history with this colloquium. Her inspiring story encourages us all to do our part in creating a more just, inclusive, and equitable world. Immediately following the video, you'll hear an introduction of the history of African American Heritage Month. Thank you.
It was quite late when I started school. In fact, I was 7 years old before I got to the inside of a school. And then I didn't have people in my immediate family who had graduated even from high school. But to graduate from high school as valedictorian, then to be able to go to college with parents who had no money, and to achieve 2 master's degrees, one at the University of Chicago and one at Atlanta University, and then the doctorate from the University of Alabama. I consider a blessing uh, that I was able to do this. And then to go back and work at a school that had denied me admission, the University of Alabama, I felt it was an achievement and really a blessing.
I knew Ethel professionally before I started teaching at Montevallo. And I originally started teaching as an adjunct professor, but when I came on full time, Ethel had already been there 3 or 4 years, so she was already known across campus and to the student body. And in fact, by that time, enough faculty members across campus had met her, and she was in quite high demand to be on committees and programs and that kind of thing, simply because she was so good. But because she understood poverty, she did not come from a well-to-do family herself. So, given where she had worked in Hale County, and Jefferson County, I mean, those are hotbeds of poverty. She understood and saw poor people, black and white, and disenfranchisement all the time. She didn't just live in Alabama, so she understood that the whole world was not like Alabama, and that Alabama could be different.
Our next honoree is Dr. Ethel Harris Hall. Distinguished educator, Dr. Ethel Hall has the distinction of being the first African American to serve as Vice President of the Alabama State Board of Education, a position that she held for 10 consecutive terms.
I look at her resume and all the things that she contributed to, and she just has such a diverse expression of service to others, and just being there and contributing towards the conversation, contributing towards the narrative, and then that way influencing the direction of whatever venture that she took on. And I just have a respect for that type of work ethic, that type of intentionality, and also, just that the respect that she gained along the way. I think that we learn so much by looking at the example of influencers from the past. Dr. Ethel Hall, lived during a time where it was just contentious. Listening to probably the barriers that she faced, and taking that as motivation to make things better for people in the future. I reap the benefits of her achievement, as an African American female and also a part of the educational world. I really respect the fact that she did what she did through educational advocacy in particular, and I really find that it's fitting that we honor her legacy through by highlighting issues surrounding social justice in the same framework of educational awareness. And she gained, I think that one of the footnotes in her biography is that she earned over 200 awards, just leaving a positive trail of influence in whatever venture that she took on. And that in itself, I think, just earns the respect of so many as a groundbreaker, as a legacy maker, but also as, again, we continue to reap the influence of what she did to this very day.
You know, I was born to parents who really were poor by anybody's standards. But I was able to do some things that people said couldn't be done. I think young people should realize that nothing is impossible, that they can achieve, they can do. Um, we just have to have a desire, want to do, believe in themselves, believe it, and you will achieve it.
I'm gonna read about Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson, a noted Black scholar and historian, and founder of what is now the Association for the Study of Afro-American Life and History, initiated Black History Week in 1926. For many years, the second week of February, chosen so as to coincide with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln, was celebrated by people in the United States. In 1976, as part of the nation's bicentennial, it was expanded and became established as Black History Month and is now celebrated all over North America. The University of Alabama School of Social Work also has established a tradition to conserve, preserve, and perpetuate African American history and culture. In 2011, when discussing with Dean Lucinda Roth, who Dr. Ethel Hall was, and her critical role in developing the school's first African American Heritage Program, Dr. Cassandra Simon, with the support of the Dean, presented a resolution to the School of Social Work faculty requesting the African American Heritage Program to be named after Dr. Hall. A part of the resolution reads as follows, as I present to the next presenter, Asha Winston.
Hello, I am Aisha Winston, and I serve as GSWO Secretary, and I'll be reading the resolution. Whereas commitment to an annual celebration of African Americans and African American heritage by the School of Social Work demonstrates, in a public way, the school's recognition of the importance of such celebration and contributing to the common good in a socially just society. Whereas Dr. Ethel Hall was the first woman and African American to graduate from the University of Alabama School of Social Work's doctoral program. And whereas Dr. Ethel Hall was instrumental in instituting the school's first African American Heritage Day program. Be it resolved that the University of Alabama's School of Social Work is committed to continuing its 33rd year tradition of having an annual African American Heritage Day celebration, with financial and other support by the Dean's Office, and be it resolved that the said celebration from this day forward be named the Dr. Ethel Hall African American Heritage Day celebration in honor of her outstanding contributions and pioneering efforts. Next up is Kirsten Taylor.
The resolution passed with full support by the School of Social Work faculty. In addition to her contributions to the School of Social Work, Dr. Hall is noted as being the first African-American woman elected to the Alabama State Board of Education and was re-elected to 6 consecutive terms, serving as vice president for 2 terms. A career educator, she holds degrees from Alabama A&M University, the University of Chicago, Atlanta University, and the University of Alabama. She taught in Alabama public schools and at the universities of Montevallo and Alabama, where she was named Associate Professor Emerita by UA Board of Trustees in 1990 for outstanding contributions to teaching, research, and service. In 2011, the biographical account of her was shared in her book entitled My Journey, a memoir of the first African-American to preside over the Alabama Board of Education. Dr. Hall passed away on November 12, 2011, having left her footprint on this earth. We in the School of Social Work are pleased that we were able to have Dr. Hall as a speaker and present her with the resolution naming our celebration after earlier that year before her death. Now we will have the in memoriam of notable African Americans in 2021. Amy Brunson and I would like to thank you all for taking the time to remember these notable African Americans and essential workers who passed away in 2021. I will now turn the virtual podium over to PhD student Angela Smith.
Greetings, everyone. So I'm here to introduce our amazing guest speaker we have today. So starting college is supposed to be the beginning of your adult life. During this time, you feel like you're on the right track to becoming the professional you desire to be. Now we all know that there are bumps in the road, unforeseen problems, and just a world of mystery that can hinder the course of your life when you're in college. In 1994, our guest speaker did not just have roadblocks, it seemed to be a hurricane, tornado, and an earthquake wrapped in one, and the result was being sentenced to 24 and a half years in federal prison. Kemba went from being a college student to a drug dealer's girlfriend to being in a domestic violence relationship to landing in prison. Kemba is often labeled the poster child for reversing a disturbing trend in the rise of lengthy sentences for first-time and non-violent drug offenders. Her story was featured on a variety of television shows and in several publications. The support promoted the then President Clinton to commute her sentence in December 2000 after serving 6.5 years in prison. Today, Kemba is a wife, mother, public speaker, advocate, consultant, and the author of Poster Child. She has worked with senior officers at the White House, the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, members of Congress, and has led trainings for federal and state probationary organizations across the country. Corporations such as Verizon, Travelers Foundation, Procter & Gamble, Bank of America, and Gulfstream have sponsored her speaking at events across the country. She has received numerous awards and recognition for her courage and determination as a motivator speaker and advocate. In 2019, Kemba was appointed to the Virginia Parole Board by Governor Rev. Northam and served in this position until January 14, 2022, due to the transition in new administration. Prior to her appointment, she served on the Virginia Criminal Sentencing Commission and held the position of State Advocacy Campaigns Director with ACLU of Virginia. Currently, she continues to serve on the Board of Directors for Virginia Cares Drug Policy Alliance. She is also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the NAACP. Along with being an advocate for criminal justice reform, Kemba is the founder of her 501, the Kemba Smith Foundation. Ultimately, Kemba knows that there is a lesson in each experience in life, and she has embraced her experience, learned from it, and she is now using the experience to teach others. Please, let's give a warm welcome to Mrs. Kemba Smith Pradia.
Good afternoon. Well, good afternoon here on the East Coast, but good morning Central Time. It brings me great pleasure. Thank you so much, Angie Smith, for that wonderful introduction. I am truly, truly honored to have been invited to be the speaker for an event such as this and lifting up Dr. Ethel H. Hall, a true inspiration and pioneer to the U of A community and to Alabama and to our country for the work that she's done. But I didn't know that I was going to need tissue, you know, in watching the lead up to my speaking. This is such a dynamic program, and to hear UA's African-American gospel choir singing, "I've been through too much not to worship you, and my worship's for real." I come to you humbly, sharing my experience, my lived experience, and again, in all humility, wanting to thank SOAR Dr. Hatcher for making yourself available to be a part of this program. And it's such an honor, and congratulations to your position being the first Black woman to serve as dean in the school's 54-year history. And also I would like to send a special thank you to Leah and Avani, chairs and co-chairs of the committee that planned this program, and also to my dear friend Sharon Wilkes, that I know probably threw my name out there as a speaker for today as well, and she's a longtime supporter. But just really grateful. But I've been sharing my story of, you know, triumph to tragedy for two reasons ever since my release from federal prison in 2000. Number one, I don't believe each and every young person has to make each and every mistake in life, that they can hear another person's story and make a determination that they don't want to go down that same path. So I've been very passionate in being transparent and sharing about some of the choices that I made that led to my incarceration, to prevent, to stop the mass incarceration of our young people, so that, you know, our young people can not say they didn't know and hold themselves accountable to try not to get caught up in these systems. But then also too, my second reason for sharing is because I left too many people behind in our prison criminal justice system. And so it's been really important for me to continue to advocate for those that I left behind. And oftentimes, you know, I can remember coming home from prison a week later, you know, having PTSD, and my therapist still, you know, says that I, you know, deal with that still even 20 years later. But during that first week, I can remember my mother coming into my room and, you know, seeing me tearing up and crying and asking me, you know, what was wrong with me. And I told her, you know, because I felt bad because there were so many other people that deserved the same opportunity that I had towards freedom. And so, you know, I know it was shared, and I'll share later on in my presentation as well, but I was actually sentenced in 1994, and I was sentenced as a first-time nonviolent drug offender to 24 and a half years in federal prison, which was longer than I had actually been living on this earth, because I was 23 at the time. And so for me to be in prison for 6.5 years and to have served, and I say only, but it's not something for me to just brush over lightly, but I served 6.5 years, and it was, you know, by the grace of several factors that I'll explain, but ultimately it took the President of the United States to sign a document in order for me to be released. And so, you know, it would be easy for someone to walk out of that situation, close the chapter in that book and move on. But I knew that I wanted to continue to share the story, to help promote change, to continue to bring humanization to people who are incarcerated. And so I'm just going to ask if you can go ahead and play this video so that you can see me, the Kemba, who was incarcerated, and I'll continue my presentation after that.
I'll get you. From a distance, they look like the perfect American family. Gus and Odessa Smith playing with their 3-year-old grandson Armani outside their suburban Richmond, Virginia home. Married 30 years, the Smiths are college graduates. Gus is an accountant, Odessa is a school teacher. They've spent their entire lives working to create a loving home environment and raising their only child, Kemba, who's now 26 years old. At this stage of their lives, it would appear as though they've got it all, but behind all the smiles and laughter is a deep sadness and pain because their daughter has been virtually snatched away from them. It's a story the Smiths can hardly come to grips with. Their little girl showed so much promise for the future.
Kemba did all the normal things as a little girl, piano lessons, ballet, gymnastic, summer camp, computer camp.
We would be the two out in the rain playing or out running around doing exercises, and we did a lot together.
But in 1991, when Kemba went to study at Hampton University, she met Peter Michael Hall at a party. He was a big-time drug dealer, the man the Smiths say would ultimately turn their world into a living hell.
He knew who she was, that she was very naive and she was gullible, and he basically took advantage of her.
Kemba became Peter's girlfriend and his punching bag. In 1993, he was indicted on a list of drug charges. Kemba, who was then 7 months pregnant, also took the fall. She was convicted of conspiracy to distribute roughly 500 pounds of crack cocaine, money laundering, and making false statements to a federal agent. The conspiracy conviction means that by knowing and participating in Peter's drug dealing, Kemba was also responsible for the entire drug operation. Kemba Smith is serving a 24-and-a-half-year prison sentence here at the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut. From the street, you can see trees, flowers, and beautiful landscaping. But beyond the top of this hill is what prison officials don't want our cameras to videotape. It's the facility surrounded by rows of barbed wire, security cameras, and prison guards. But we were granted a one-on-one interview with Kemba. As she walked into the visiting room, you can see the toll this ordeal has taken on her.
For the people who've never seen you before, just tell everybody how you're doing here.
I think it would be easy for me to say that I was fine, but that's not the case. In all actuality, I'm struggling to try to maintain my growth while I'm here, my mental, physical, emotional growth.
Kemba says that during the court case, prosecutors admitted that she did not use, handle, or sell crack cocaine. But because of the large quantity of drugs, Kemba became another victim of stiff minimum mandatory sentencing laws.
It doesn't make sense to me at all. I think it's a total waste.
As for Peter, he didn't do any prison time. He was found in Washington State, shot in the head.
With everything you know now about Peter and after everything he's done to you, how do you feel about him? Do you hate him in any way?
No, I can't say that I hate him because of my faith.
But Kemba says she stayed with Peter because she was terrified of him and what he might do.
There were periods of verbal and physical abuse where he would go into rages, strangling me, and to the point where I thought that I was going to die.
He threatened my life. She knew he had been here and he knew where we lived.
And
he killed his best friend.
And none of that seemed to matter.
And the courts completely ignored that.
Let's talk about your family. How are they coping with all of this?
You got me. I know it's very hard on my parents, and I appreciate everything that they're doing and the love that they have for me. And I know it hurts, you know, I see the pain in their faces. So this is the part of prison that really hits the heart and is painful, is knowing what you're doing to family, because it's not easy for them out there. And I know that me being their only child, and for things to have turned out the way that they've turned out, and they have to continuously fight from day to day to bring me home, and they're not going to stop fighting until I'm home.
We both have promised that we will stay strong, stay focused. We pray to the Lord that He will listen to our prayers, answer our prayers, and bring her home soon.
While incarcerated, Kemba's parents have the tough job of raising little Armani. He's a bright and very inquisitive little boy. He always questions why his mommy can't come home.
I just basically explained to him that mommy was in a timeout, an adult timeout, and that I wanted to be home with him, but at this particular time, I have to be in timeout and be away from you.
Kemba's story has been told in Emerge magazine, newspapers, and television. The response has been phenomenal. Hundreds of letters from around the world have come pouring in. Kemba's main hope is that by going public, people will think long and hard about the choices they make before hanging out with a bad crowd or doing something illegal.
Don't allow the system to snatch you up and take you away from your family and to rob you from becoming a better person. Step out of that lifestyle from now, you know, when you can, when you're not being forced to, and make something of your life.
For BET News, I'm Tracy Brown.
Thank you. Thank you. So watching that video, I definitely wanted to share just so you could see the backstory and actually see me while I was incarcerated. But I'm very intentional with this presentation today. And I have a slideshow that I'm gonna kind of go through, but with reimagining criminal justice and changing the narrative, one of the first steps that we need to do in reimagining is to stop having just one perception about who we are, who formerly incarcerated people are in the US. And, you know, I just think that, you know, one of the things that I can recall hearing is that because of, and if you could go to the next slide, because of, you know, my background, I came from a two-parent home. You know, I was my parents' only child. They were middle class. You know, how could someone like me get caught up in the system? And, you know, I'm not the only, you know, type of person that gets caught up in the system. And so in my backstory, basically, you know, my parents did a wonderful job raising me, and you were introduced to them. And my mother, she's also a retired former educator. So I know her and Dr. Hall would have hit it off really well. But basically my parents had sent me off to college, and I had the choice of, in deciding in my college choice, I had the choice of Hampton University or Radford University in Virginia. And so I grew up in predominantly white schools. And so when I went to visit Radford University, I was just like, I don't know, we'll see. You know, it's a beautiful campus. But then when my parents took me to Hampton University, I can remember one of the first and only things that were on my mind when I stepped foot on campus was, oh my goodness, look at all these fine men. I didn't care what I was going to major in, what Hampton was good at. I just felt like I wanted a part of that cultural experience. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And I know I went on to the next slide, but I do want to make sure I mention the fact that my parents, they are the true heroes to the Kemba Smith story and the poster child story. So I'm always forever indebted and grateful for their support because, you know, there's some parents that send their kids off to school, you know, and basically they say, you know, if you make your bed, you lay in it. And I thank God for my parents' unconditional love through this process, even until today. But as I share with you my college experience, understand that what happened to me on Hampton University's campus could have happened to me on the University of Alabama's campus. I don't want you to think that, you know, these are just things that can happen on HBCU campuses. And so initially when I started off college, you know, I was fine. I was doing well during the summer as I, you know, got acclimated in pre-college. And then when the fall came, I started comparing myself to some of the other women that were on campus. And I started developing a sense of low self-esteem, low self-worth. And, you know, instead of, you know, me seeking out, you know, counseling, women's health, I was more so concerned about wanting to fit in. And I know during my high school experience, I was, you know, a member of several organizations in the marching band. Don't ask me why I didn't join Hampton University's band, because HBCUs are known to have some of the baddest bands in the land. But I went through these insecure feelings, and eventually I saw Peter come on campus quite frequently. And that's the person that I ended up getting into this relationship with, who was my drug dealer boyfriend. And I would see him interact with different people. I would see him pick up girls that were on the dean's list and sororities. And I kind of looked and wondered, who this guy was. And then it became a point where he noticed me and started talking to me. And I can remember having this warm, fuzzy feeling inside, thinking, oh my gosh, he's actually talking to me. But going back to that self-worth and self-confidence, if I would have loved me the way that I needed to, I would have known it was only a matter of time before he would speak to me, and see it as a privilege if I took the time to say hello and not the other way around. So these are some topics that, I generally talk to young people about in helping them understand things to look out for in relationships and making healthy choices as they move forward. And so, eventually, Peter and I got into this 3.5 year relationship. And I know none of the more mature women in this Zoom have ever thought this way, but there was a point in time where I had heard what it was that Peter did. I'm not one of those people that have been incarcerated to say, oh, I didn't know what he was doing, or I didn't do anything wrong. There were some things that I did do, but the things that I did, I don't believe warranted me receiving a 24.5 year sentence. But I go back to saying that eventually there became a point where I thought, well, maybe if I stay with him, maybe I could save him, maybe I could change him. And somewhere along the line, I got that mixed up because my parents, Gus and Odessa Smith, did not send me to Hampton University to convert some drug dealer into being a law-abiding citizen. So I lost focus out of my own priorities, goals, aspirations, and focused more on a relationship. And so, I'm not going to go too much into it, but I know I watched this program with my husband called the Tinder Swindler. And so, when I was growing up, we didn't have social media. We didn't have all these various apps, but, in watching that show, it just showed the lengths that women will go to in relationships in order to feel love. So my crime in getting into the criminal justice system wasn't the fact that I was criminally minded. My crime was that I chose the wrong relationship. And eventually that there were red flags in this relationship where, he began to be controlling in, who I hung out with, what I wore. And there were these red flags, and I did not pay attention to those red flags like I should have. And the first time Peter actually put his hands on me, I thought that he was going to kill me. He strangled me to the point where blood vessels were popped all over my face and in my eyeballs, and had beat me on my body. And I can remember initially after that first incident, in my mind, I told myself, as soon as I get away from him, I'm never going to see him again. But then I listened to the I'm sorry's, it'll never happen again. And basically I ended up, staying with him. And it became a point of where I tell young people to be careful who you associate yourself with, because there was a point where my girlfriends knew what had happened, or, had some assumption of what had happened. And none of them, pulled me to the side to say, oh my gosh, Kemba, what happened? Did he beat you? And so that's when embarrassment and shame began to sink in. And so again, there was where I went back to campus, and I should have taken the opportunity to step away and get help, seek counseling. But I did not do that. So I always strongly encourage university students, if there's anything that you have been through that you're not necessarily dealing with, currently going through, or something that may have happened in the past, that you make sure that you seek out the help at the university because it's a wealth of it there. So, but I did not do that, and became a point in time where Peter had actually killed his best friend because he thought his best friend was cooperating with the authorities. And at that particular point, I couldn't believe that I was with someone who had taken another person's life. And, you know, in this PowerPoint presentation, one of the pictures shows Peter sitting actually in my family's living room. And I always tell, you know, students to be careful of who you bring around in your safe spaces. And I say students and I say younger people, but sometimes this is for grown people as well. In the fact that it became a point where, you know, he knew where my parents live, and he actually had threatened my father because there was a particular time where he wasn't able to talk to me because I had turned myself into the authorities, and he wanted to know what had transpired. And so it became a point where that, you know, love that I initially had for him turned more so to fear, and me feeling the need to protect myself and protect my family. And so it became a point where the government basically wanted me to turn myself in. And of course, I'm abbreviating the story tremendously. But when I did turn myself in, the prosecutor had a conversation with my attorney, and he had basically promised my attorney that if I turned myself in, that I would be granted a bond because I was 7 months pregnant at the time. And he reneged on that promise. And then he also said that if I pled guilty, that I would only get sentenced to 24 months. And he reneged on that promise as well. And that's, you know, called prosecutorial misconduct. And so, you know, I turned myself in thinking that I was going to be free in order to give birth to my son. But that didn't happen. And so I ended up, if you can go to the next slide, I ended up turning myself in 7 months pregnant, and basically having to go to doctor's appointments once a week in handcuffed and shackles, and sitting in a waiting room in the local clinic with people staring at me, looking at me like I was a public spectacle, wondering what kind of crime did I commit in my, you know, orange jumpsuit and handcuffs and shackles. And it was a very painful time, but one of the things that I cherished the most during that time was actually, you know, being able to sit in the jail cell and feel my son moving inside me. And basically I would cherish those moments because I didn't know what my future was going to be. And so eventually I ended up giving birth to my son. And I thank God again for my parents, because my dad went to the hospital before I gave birth to my son because he didn't want the hospital staff to be treating me any kind of way, because, you know, I was this person in an orange jumpsuit that was coming from the local jail. And 5 minutes after I gave birth to my son, the U.S. Marshal stormed into my hospital room and said that I couldn't have any visitors. So with this slide, the U.S. Marshals literally came into the room shortly after my father was taking these pictures, and basically they were ordering everyone to get out of the room, that I couldn't have any visitors, that there could only be 2 correctional officers in the room, that there had to be 2 correctional officers in the room with me, guarding me, and that my leg had to be handcuffed and shackled to the bed at all times. And so I'm really grateful that the woman who was head of the hospital was working during that time. And most people wouldn't speak up to the U.S. Marshals, but she came into my room and told the U.S. Marshals, this is my hospital, I'm going to run it the way that I want to. And she allowed my parents to stay in the room next door. Had that not happened, my son would have automatically gone into the social service system because there wasn't anybody there to physically take custody of him after I was going back to county jail. So if you could go to the next slide. And so prison, some people ask me the question, you know, what was the most difficult part about your prison experience? And I would have to say that, you know, of course, it still impacts me today, because it's very difficult for me to, you know, I cherish them, but I have emotional, negative emotional feelings. And the fact that, you know, when I see baby pictures of my son, the fact that I miss that time with him. And so after I gave birth to my son, 2 days after, I went back to county jail. And in county jail in the state of Virginia, there's no physical contact. So therefore, I wasn't able to touch, hold, smell, feel my son until I was transferred to a federal prison, which was over 2,000 miles away from him. And so I'm really grateful again to my parents, because they did make sacrifices so that once I was transferred to California, that I did get to physically touch him. And that was probably about seven months after I gave birth to him. But the impacts of mass incarceration on children is tremendous. And, you know, even for myself and thinking about, you know, when I wasn't there, my parents basically shared with me how when they took my son home after leaving the hospital to their house, that they couldn't get him to stop crying, that he was crying uncontrollably. And it wasn't until my mom took him into my bedroom where they think that he could smell my scent and things and items that were there, where he was able to calm down some. But no one back then, again, this was in 1994, you know, criminal justice is not where it is today. But I'm sure there are some women who are giving birth in county jails that aren't physically being able to touch, hold, smell, feel their children. So this wasn't the case with raising my son because my parents were able to raise him, but there are children that, you know, have housing instability because they end up having to be transferred from family member to family member or friend, their financial hardships, changing of caregivers. Some kids have to go in foster care, and there are also critical health outcomes. And, you know, I'm very grateful. You'll see in this picture, my son is a baby, and then you'll see him with the older picture. But, you know, even at him being today 27, there's some anxiety issues that he has dealt with and is still dealing with that we know goes back to, you know, that separation and living with my parents and fighting for their daughter's freedom, for his mother's freedom, where he took on some of those anxiety traits that I'm sure children that have an incarcerated parent across the country take on. And so there are some suggestions that I have since I'm, you know, got the social work community on live here. Suggestions for system-wide responses for children, youth, and families in which a caregiver has become involved in the criminal justice system. Number one, I believe that there should be alternatives to incarceration via technology and electronic monitoring for incarcerated people who are parents and financially and physically involved in their child's life who pose no threat to public safety. Also, there should be mandated programming to foster physical and virtual visits with caregivers, even for individuals housed in jails across the nation, that's not predicated on someone's financial ability to do so. And, you know, I've often thought of people who are currently incarcerated during this pandemic, and I couldn't imagine, because there was a long period of time where incarcerated people weren't able to weren't able to see their kids or talk to them, which I'm sure that has not only, you know, some people don't care about that incarcerated person, but as a community, as a country, we need to start thinking about the impact on our children. Another suggestion is provide a child therapist or agency that can provide support and resources to families that can foster a healthy relationship with the child and parents so that the child won't develop anger or anxiety issues as they mature and become an adult. And I have to admit, you all see my upbringing, and my son was privileged to have my parents be able to raise him. I'm not naive to understand that even in my case and scenario, I somewhat came from a privileged background, but understand the impact of mass incarceration on children, even as they mature and become adults, that anger and anxiety issue is real, even in my own individual situation. And then also, lastly, consider a gender responsive approach that would allow mothers the opportunity for conditional release and or reinstate parole to reduce the impact of family trauma due to lengthy incarceration. And like I said, I was scheduled to be in prison. I stated earlier, I turned myself in 1994, but I wasn't supposed to be released until 2016. And so my son would have been a grown man by the time that I was released. But I'm very grateful. I'll just share this smidget. My son is very successful. He completed his graduate degree during the pandemic, actually in Paris, France, and also in Amsterdam. But he's currently working in New York today. But if you could go to the next slide. I think one of the things that really caught me early on today was, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, Key Stevens, when she was talking about the prison arts program and recognizing people that are incarcerated are human first. And I think for my situation and what led to my journey to freedom was the power of storytelling. And I'm very grateful to the magazine that you see on this slide, Emerge Magazine. They decided that they wanted to share my story, to talk about the war on drugs and how it was impacting people of color. And there were several organizations that came on board once my story was told. I thank George Curry. He's no longer living, but he also was born in the state of Alabama, but also Reginald Stewart, he wrote the Emerge article that touched people across this country. And so with these organizations being involved, Elaine Jones, she was director of the Legal Defense Fund, and she decided that she wanted to take on my case. And it was about not just feeling sorry for me, Kemba Smith, and the fact that I was my parents' only child. Basically, it was about, back then, the fastest growing population within prison were Black women. And so LDF had thought that my case could set a precedent for other women, other first-time nonviolent drug offenders in bringing forth relief. But unfortunately, my only source of relief was through executive clemency. But I will share that prison is something that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Being told when to get up, when to go to bed, when you can eat. And so for those of you all, with this being Black History Month as well, with the 13th Amendment, I think being incarcerated was the closest that I could have experienced to what our ancestors went through, because the 13th Amendment basically says that slavery is illegal with the exception of if you commit a crime. And I can remember going out, being transferred to that prison in California where I was telling you that I was able to hold, touch, feel my son for the first time after giving birth to him. And, I was traumatized through just the whole experience of being transported, because they would pull you and wake you up in the middle of the night. You didn't know where you were going. I can remember walking in handcuffs and shackles and loading on a van, and then about 100 or so of us loading up on a airplane and just being scared to death. And again, like looking each other in the eyes as we're being transported, just knowing that this is the most humiliating position that we could be in. But with this 13th Amendment and through this prison experience. It was very, very traumatic. And I can remember an instance where, I had a visit with my family. It was Children's Day is what they call it, where they had an event where the children could come behind the fence and come visit with us for a certain amount of time during the day. And I had the opportunity to interact with my son. And there was a point where, the visit was over and everyone had left. And there was a correctional officer that basically called me over and told me that he wanted me to carry a table somewhere. And I can remember still just trying to get myself together and being really emotional and tearing up because, my son had just left. And basically one of my friends had told the officer, I'll do it. Don't worry about it. Just, let her get herself together. I don't mind, taking the table. And the officer basically said, no, I told you to do it. You need to do it. And that moment let me realize exactly where I was and what this prison industrial complex creates within human bodies and individuals. This feeling of being oppressed and worthless. And it's an inner struggle while you're incarcerated to not believe that into yourself and to grow. So, there were programs within the facility that, I participated in. I actually taught a Black history class while I was incarcerated. There were 2 white women that taught this Black history class before me. And I can remember, some of the women on the yard, saying how they weren't going to go to this class. Like, what are these 2 white women going to teach us about Black history? And in my mind, I was thinking, well, shoot, I don't have anything else to do. Let me go see what they're talking about. And actually, they were incarcerated for political reasons. And basically, I soaked up all the information that they had to give. And once they were transferred, I was able to take over their class. But I think me teaching that class helped to build me, helped me to realize, in this moment of Black History Month, we have some young people that don't even, want to read a book. They don't understand the sacrifices of what it took for us to be where we are today. And I think it's really important to make sure our youth, and I don't want to make this conversation controversial, but there's so many people that are against this critical race theory, but I know while I was incarcerated and as I learned more about our history, our people, and it's not just Black history, it's American history, it can uplift any race of people in this country. And when I learned of that knowledge, it made me want to kick myself in the butt because I needed to have been carrying the torch, continue to carry the torch of the sacrifices of our people and what they've done. And so that's why it's been really important for me to share with young people how easy it is to get caught up in the system, because so many young people feel as if it can't happen to them. And so if you could go to the next slide. Basically, after serving 6.5 years, there was a mini movement to free me. And like I said, it wasn't just about helping me, but they had hoped that it would set a precedent for others. But unfortunately, Norfolk federal court would not hear any of my motions or petitions because with my case, the attorney that was representing me, he was willing to testify with regard to his ineffective assistance of counsel due to his friendship with the prosecutor, but they weren't able to get in the courts. They didn't want to hear our position. And so my only source of relief was to receive executive clemency from the president, which happened December 22nd, 2000. One important thing that I think is important when we talk about drug policy and the war on drugs that I want to make sure I don't miss is that the prosecutor even stated that I didn't handle use, or sell any of the drugs that were involved. Understand with conspiracy drug laws that you don't actually have to be on the street corner selling the drugs, that just based on your associations that you can get caught up in a conspiracy as well and be charged with certain things. And so I came out in 2000, and most people think that, you know, if you receive clemency, you know, you're automatically have a clean slate. And that was not the case for me. I actually was on probation for almost 5 years. But it was important for me, once I was released, for me to go back to school and complete my undergraduate degree. So I really, really would like to commend again the Alabama Prison Arts Project. It was so enlightening to hear the number. I think I heard over 5,000 students have participated in this program, people who are incarcerated that have had the opportunity to obtain, I don't know if it's a certificate or a degree, but I believe I heard her say a BS degree, which I think should be implemented all across the country and within the federal system, because eventually people are going to come home and eventually they can be your neighbor. And I feel like we need to be prepared in coming home with proper education. You'll note, I'm sure there's several research documents that show the benefit to, you know, one, having an education, obtaining education while incarcerated, because it opens the door to many opportunities where they won't want to go back to a previous lifestyle. But after my release from prison, it was really important for me to, even on probation, to speak out about my ordeal. My attorneys did not want me to talk about it. But I felt like as long as I was being truthful about what had happened, that I needed to speak out. And I tell people, be careful what you pray for, because while I turned myself in 7 months pregnant, scared to death, I asked God to allow me to be a voice to prevent others from going down the same path. And, you know, when this day finally came, I knew that I had to speak out about my ordeal. And so ever since then, I've been advocating for those that I've left behind in prison. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but I actually have a friend, Michelle West, who I met while I was incarcerated. She was a huge influence to me and other women who are incarcerated, but she actually is still serving her federal sentence. She has served over 28 years, and she also is a first-time offender, but she's actually serving a life sentence. So she's been in prison for 28 years looking at documentation that doesn't even have a release date. It's basically saying that she will stay there until she dies. So I share that because, you know, there's a whole lot of work to do. And if we could go to the next slide. You know, as we're reflecting on, you know, Dr. Ethel Hall and also Dr. Hatcher, you know, being, you know, the first, you know, I just want to, you know, shout out to Elaine Jones from LDF. This was in 2019 where I visited their office and gave a talk. But basically Elaine Jones, she made a decision that she was going to fight. When she read that Emerge article, she made a decision that she was going to make sure my case saw justice. And she was actually the first Black woman to graduate from University of Virginia's law school. But I'm grateful for the work that she's put out there and other Black women. And even while I was incarcerated, you know, I'll share briefly where, you know, there was this movement, and through her leadership and her being a member of the National Council of Negro Women, the Links Incorporated, and also Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, my sorority, she had their national presidents come on board with trying to change policy and change laws and support my case. And I can remember being in federal prison, and those three women came to the prison. I can remember to this day, a correctional officer asked me while I was getting ready to walk into the visitation room. He said, "Who are these three Black women coming to visit you in a white limousine?" Because they basically had locked the prison down for a little while. And so in my mind, I thought, you just don't know, because at that moment, I knew that it wasn't just about them coming to visit me, but it was about them seeing worth in people who are incarcerated and hopefully helping to, for us to see justice so that there could be change. But like I said, this was back in 2000, and today we're in a different space. And so if you could go to the next slide. Since my release, there has been this transformation to success. And basically I've used, if we could go to the next slide, I've used this, this platform that I've had because my parents basically had been speaking out about my situation while I was incarcerated. That once I came home, there were people that actually wanted to hear from me. And so I began my public speaking journey, and I went back to school. I can remember to my social work students, I can remember in school doing, 21 credit hours, doing my social work internship, working at a law firm, and just juggling and raising my son. But it was really important for me to use my lived experience, which they call trauma-informed leadership, in order to share with our communities about what I experienced and what I thought there should be changes in, and to motivate other people to want to get involved, to advocate for change. And on this particular slide, I'll just note the picture in the right-hand bottom. Basically, I was part of an NAACP delegation that traveled to Geneva, Switzerland 3 times to advocate for voter suppression laws in the US. And I spoke to high officials there at the UN, people from different countries. And I can remember them looking at us shocked in the fact that, how is it that a person like you that has been out of prison for, over 10 years, and you work a job, you graduated from undergrad, how is it that you're still not able to vote in the most democratic nation in the world? And so it was important for me to be involved in these various campaigns. And through that involvement, if you can go to the next slide, there's been a sense of redemption. And, I'm grateful to be able to share my story, but understand that all human beings that are in our criminal justice systems, that are in these correctional systems, everyone has the potential to change. And I think, that's one thing that I highlighted with Ms. Stevens that spoke earlier, in the fact that everyone has the choice on whether or not they want to change their mindset while they're in that oppressive situation of being incarcerated. And so I'm grateful in the fact that through my advocacy that I've been able to rewrite my story. And I'm not gonna, profess that it was, an easy journey, easy process, because like I said, my crime was that I chose the wrong relationship. So coming out of prison, I had some hiccup with relationships. It wasn't anything as dramatic as what I went through before. And no man has ever put their hands on me, but there were some painful experiences that I had to endure. And so in rewriting my story, basically, I was able to meet President Clinton while a previous governor was on his campaign. And then you also see a picture in 2019, I was able to meet President Obama before he went out of office, and he invited a group of formerly incarcerated people. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, and I said 2019, that was not in 2019, that was in 2016. But in 2019, I was fortunate to have Governor Northam appoint me to the Virginia Parole Board. And that was a very high honor. And I can remember in college, I wanted to break glass ceilings in corporate America, but God saw fit to see it in a different way, because I don't know of another formerly incarcerated person who has been a voting member on a parole board across the country. So we all have the potential to rewrite our stories. And so with the next slide, I'm also in the process of working with Christina Swanson and Moving Pictures Institute. They are working on producing a film about my story that I'm very excited about. And I'm sure I can't talk too much about it, but I just wanted to let this audience know. And if you go to the next slide. And this is my contact information. And if you're interested in getting a copy of my book, that's where you can get it. And if we could just clear the PowerPoint, because there are some final points that I would just like to mention. With my experience, God has blessed me with having been incarcerated and the trauma that led up to that incarceration. And one of the things that I think really needs to be looked at is, again, in reimagining our criminal justice system, is looking at the trauma initially of what someone has endured and understanding that front narrative prior to someone even getting a pre-sentence report or being charged with the crime, that a judge should know that front narrative in order to make a decision on and call a judgment on someone's sentencing, or if they should be found guilty of a crime. And with me having this experience of being incarcerated, then I also have this experience of, you know, a quasi-judicial position. And with being on the parole board, I just strongly encourage all the social work professional folks to please get involved in this criminal justice movement work, because I know that as a BSW, I know one of the foundations that principles with social work is basically starting where the person is. And I think oftentimes that's not done in the criminal justice setting. And I know oftentimes we talk about giving people in the criminal justice system a second chance. Well, if you knew some of these stories, you would understand. And I'm sure some of you on the social work profession already know the stories, but there's some people that aren't given a first chance. And so it's really important for us to get involved in this. There are law students across this country that are advocating, and, you know, professors are working with the students to, you know, be a part of parole hearings and advocating, you know, for people to come home. But one of the things in doing that, I think there's this huge criminal justice reform movement. And, you know, I'm someone who had a nonviolent offense, but I've had the opportunity, there's a network, Just Leadership USA, where there's a group of formerly incarcerated people that are doing big work across the country. If you're interested in reading some of their profiles, I strongly encourage you to go to their website. But everyone that's a part of that network, they're not nonviolent offenders. And I've had the opportunity to know, to work with in where we are today as far as the violence in our country, and youth and young people understand that there are some people that are incarcerated in our systems that were incarcerated and sentenced at 15, 16, and have been in prison for 30, 40, 20 years, but they are no longer the person that they were when they were 14, 15, hence the reasoning for the US versus Miller case in making juvenile life sentences unconstitutional. And so in understanding this bigger picture, we need people in the social work profession to understand who these people are today. After the prison system has done what it needs to do, which that's what our tax money is going to, we need to make sure that we change the narrative so that we can dissolve this fear and ignorance in this country, because we're the top country in the nation that's incarcerating our own more than any other nation. And so we need to start reimagining criminal justice and figuring out systems where money maybe can be diverted to some of these bigger public safety, police enforcement. And I'm not saying we don't need, any of that, but we need some of this money to be going towards the front end as well. And so that's where I'm directing this conversation. And even with me being on the other side too, I had tremendous empathy. One of the reasons why I was brought onto the parole board was because I was a victim. I was a victim of domestic violence. And I also was a victim, but I don't know if I said it in my presentation, but my son's father actually was murdered. And so I understood also the victim's perspective. And I think also in the social work profession that we need to find ways to help victims heal. Because even if a person doesn't have a life sentence, eventually they're going to come home. And hopefully the goal is for that person to find peace in spite of if a person was harmed. And I know this is a very difficult conversation to have or to entertain, and I'm not trying to make light of violent situations or sexual situations, but we need to analyze and research our criminal correctional systems to see if they're working, and if they are working, and if there are laws in place for people to have second chances. We need to prepare our communities for those people who need to be released so that we can change the narrative, so people can trust and believe that those people are no longer who they used to be. And one of the things that people don't understand is that that person has to deal, and I'm sure it's not as bad as maybe the victim thinking about the harm, but that person has to deal with who they used to be for a lifetime as well. And even for myself, I didn't physically harm anyone, but there are times where I reflect about my past and how I could have done things different and compare myself to traditionally what people are doing today. And so it's an inner struggle that people have to release those psychological bondages to continue to walk into their greatness of being who they are today. So I hope I've made that clear. And I know I've probably missed saying a few things, but I do want to open the floor up for any questions or comments that you may have. But I do want to end with a quote from Lewis Reed, where he said, "Those closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but often furthest from the resources, influence, and power." And so, again, I'm grateful to Virginia and appointing me on the Virginia Parole Board to be able to be in a position of influence. But I strongly encourage you all, wherever you're listening from, and in particular in the state of Alabama, that, and even in the social work profession and agencies and organizations, wherever you may be, that you allow people that have been impacted to be at the table, to help in influencing decision makers, opening up opportunities for them to be in leadership positions to help them grow. But you would be amazed, because oftentimes, some of the time, and I'm just gonna end it here. I know I said I was gonna end it a second ago, but oftentimes, you know, there can be these community listening sessions, or, you know, things that organizations will have or government entities will have. And, you know, there'll be formerly incarcerated people or impacted people that are part of that conversation, where you're able to pick up on certain things in that moment. But can you fathom if you actually had that person on staff and they could be a part of whatever initiatives or programming that you're trying to instill, because they have firsthand knowledge of what would be most beneficial to certain populations. So I really, truly hope I haven't stepped on any toes, but I think at this point, I'm not supposed to care, because I think God opens and puts platforms for me just to be transparent and transformational. So I really appreciate University of Alabama and all those involved with having me speak today, giving me this opportunity. And I wish the very best for each and every one of you in your future endeavors. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kemba. We greatly appreciate you and all that you have given us today. You have given us so much to take forward as we reimagine the criminal justice system. And just some of the nuggets, you know, for our students, I just want to reiterate before I go forward. I want whoever has a question, we ask that you post your question in the chat, and we will get to your, hopefully we will be able to get to your question. And so I know you had a lot of great nuggets for our students. You said, you know, be careful who you associate yourself with, be careful who you bring into your safe space, and encourage students to seek help. And so we do have the Women Resource and Gender Center. So if any student or any faculty staff have any concerns or need professional help, we ask that you reach out to Women Resource and Gender Center. And also some of the recommendations, I thought they were very powerful. Some alternatives to incarceration, and we should mandate programming, provide child therapists who can help parents and children foster those relationships. And so you've given us so much. We really appreciate you for unveiling yourself and for just being very transparent. And these are some of the conversations that we really need to have. So if you have any questions, we ask that you put your questions in the chat. We have about another 15 minutes for our Q&A. So we have one question for you, Mrs. Kemba. Do you think former incarcerated people will be given the right to vote?
That is depending on individual states. And I know a lot has been done in the state of Virginia. Initially, when I came home, I was not able to vote. And because my case was a drug case, they considered drug offenses to be violent. So even after I was let off of probation, I was released in 2000, let off of probation in 2005-ish. I had a mandatory wait period from after being off probation, which for nonviolent offenses, it was 3 years, and for violent offenses, it was 5. So they classified me as violent. So I had to wait 5 years after I was let off probation in order to vote. To me, voting is a basic, fundamental human right. There are some nations that even if a person is incarcerated, that they allow them the opportunity to vote. And so for me, I believe that every person coming out of prison, that if you're interested in a person reintegrating back in a healthy way, you do not want to put them in a position where they feel different politically or feel like they're, like 2/3 of a person. I think for me, even with getting my rights restored, and I want to say even recently, because I had to, I moved to a different area and I had to resubmit something through DMV to get my voter registration to be current. And that question that basically, put me in a category of basically made me feel like I wasn't human, and asking, I'm trying to remember the specifics, but basically if I was incompetent. Formerly incarcerated people are put in that category. And to me, I feel like every person should be able to exercise that basic fundamental human right. So it's definitely something that needs to be worked on a state level. I know that there is a federal bill that organizations are trying to push as well. But I do feel as if, every formerly incarcerated person should be given the opportunity to vote.
I agree, and thank you so much for responding to that question.
Thank you so much. Dr. Simon, Cassie Simon has her hand up. Dr. Simon, you can respond.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I found it really informative and engaging and very helpful. I am especially interested in the remarks you made about the learning of your history while you were incarcerated and what that did to you, because I've spent much of my career trying to teach students their history, trying to develop a program now for middle school age young people to understand and know their history, understand the struggles of their ancestors, understand the structural obstacles that are in place, in this society. And I've been trying to establish a relationship out of Auburn to get a educational program in the prison system out here. And so I would just like for you to, if you don't mind, reflect a little more on how that changed you and your perception of the world and who you were and who you should be, because you may give me some tips that I can use in trying to convince people that it's just not about teaching history, that it is about your whole view of yourself and the generations before you and what potential you have and what you owe to those who came before you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for what you're doing as an educator. And I definitely think it's important. Number one for me, knowing that history, knowing Black history, taught me resilience. That's something that, between, God giving me the strength while I was, in prison, but it was that history also that gave me the strength to understand that I could tap into that resilience. And reading, there was a book called Black Women in White America, and reading some of those slave narratives of what women endured, it helped build me through my injustice. And it also made me analyze what I was going through as something minuscule in comparison to the overarching injustice that has been going on in this country. And so also for me, it made me full of pride to witness, because there were videos that we saw, and kids have everything access at their fingertips nowadays with the internet, but to see some of those videos and interactive things that showed me us moving forward in the midst of struggle, in the midst of hurt, pain, blood, sweat, tears. it really, and this is where it really, hit home. It made me feel stupid. It made me feel stupid in the fact that all those sacrifices were made, and I didn't have, even coming from my background, I didn't have the full understanding of those sacrifices. It was like, oh, that was something that happened back then. And that's how some of our people think today. But I felt like had I had that knowledge, I would have wanted to make different decisions in moving forward, to not being a statistic in the system, but to want to continue to carry the torch of our ancestors, of those that went before us, in order for us to be where we are today. So that's why I feel like it's so truly important for Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, for all, younger people. Like you said, middle school age would be, a great age, for kids to get this knowledge, to understand they can tap into their own resilience as a human being, and also look to see how far we've come, and to look to see where they could be beneficial in their own communities and moving forward change.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is from Taylor Paul. Taylor Paul, if you would pose your question.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak. I definitely want to pay homage to Ms. Hall and everything that she stands for and she delivers. I did not know of such a great woman, and I'm actually embarrassed. So thank you guys in the University of Alabama for bringing me up to speed on this most incredible woman. But let me just speak briefly about this incredible woman as well, Kemba Smith Pradia. Listen, I'm from Virginia. I was in the system. She was our lighthouse, and she's also our blueprint. So thank you, Kemba, for describing the relevance of those of us that are returning home to help eradicate some of the social ills that we help create. When you take ownership of it, man, and you helped us understand that, to be able to come back out here and describe our relevance inside of our community with that lived experience, and showing how valuable we actually can be when we come back home. So I just want to thank you for that. And I guess my question is quite simple. By being a person here in Virginia and under the climate of Virginia, is there a possibility that we can rally support that you run for some sort of office, and I don't care what it is?
You put me on the spot, Paul. We can talk about that offline, but it has been something that has been presented to me on several occasions, and a lot more recently. But I'm gonna pivot back to you, because you're very humble. I know that. I appreciate the accolades that you gave me. But as this previous question with the educator, Paul goes into the school systems. He's has programming, and Paul, I can't even say all your programs, but he goes and gives back and tries to divert young people from certain lifestyles, and is making huge impact across the state, and I'll say across the country, because I know there's plenty of more things for you to do, Paul. But if we really want to touch our communities and try to end some of the violence that's going on in our communities, we need people like Paul to go into some of these areas where they can relate. What they have to say is relevant to what these young people are experiencing. So Paul, I thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. It is, as you stated, it is so important for all of us if we plan to reimagine this new criminal justice system. It's going to take all boots on the ground. It's going to take professionals, community leaders, lay people, everyone to get involved in activism. And so we really appreciate all the nuggets that you have given us today. And so the next person I would like to call on is Damika Sanders to pose your question. Damika.
Good afternoon and great presentation, and welcome, Soror. My question is, as I am not a social worker, I am an educator. I actually train other educators, other administrators in the state of Alabama. So my question is, as a parent, what would you tell educators that they need to know when they're working with students with incarcerated parents?
I think one of the things that I would suggest is just the need to have grace on these students, because you never know what they are dealing with. And I feel as if a educator knows this information firsthand, I don't know what kind of restrictions you all may have, but to ensure that that student connects with the guidance administrator, counselor, to make sure that they get some help. I do think that, and when I say counseling, because oftentimes young people, when they do have a parent that's incarcerated, they feel alone. They feel like nobody understands what they're going through. You know, I don't know if some schools would even want to create a safe space circle for students to be able to talk about certain emotions that they may be going through. There's an organization called We've Got Us Now. Ebony Underwood, she is a daughter of a formerly incarcerated person. Her dad actually had his sentence commuted by President Trump. And so he was released from federal prison, but that's an organization if you wanted to get some tips and suggestions. And again, I think too, I have Yasmin Arrington. She has an organization called Scholarships. And basically she provides scholarships to students that have a parent who's incarcerated. But like I said, I definitely think that having a safe space for students to come together, to be open about their feelings and emotions. And I know there's some school systems that don't allow formerly incarcerated people to come into their school system. I know I've heard of, you know, some formerly incarcerated people wanting to volunteer for PTA, you know, or the schools, and there's certain school systems that won't allow that. But I strongly encourage that, you know, I can't tell you how many kids that have come up to me that have a parent that's incarcerated or a mom that's in a domestic violence situation where they want to talk to me one-on-one after I do a presentation. So the kind of impact to have that type of relevant conversation is another thing that I've heard, to have a credible messenger that these young people can relate to, that can have a positive impact on their lives, that you have those opportunities for conversations so young people can open up about their experience and what feelings and emotions that they could be dealing with. But even as an educator, I think it's important for educators to connect with researchers, scholars, because I think as a unit, it's going to take these professions to help move our country forward with regard to criminal justice reform, to getting people to understand its impact.
Thank you for your response, Ms. Kemba. As you stated, it is so important that we understand who these people are today, not who they were at 15 and 16, but who they are today. And so that we can also help change and shape the narrative to dissolve the fear and the ignorance. And so that is very important that we understand who people are today. The next question, if you would unmute, is Kim Okanya has a question.
Okay.
All right. Hi, Soror Kemba. I first want to say just thank you so much for your testimony, your transparency. This has been great. So thank you for your life's work and your dedication to this cause. My question was about, like, what recommendations do you have to get more services like implemented inside the prison system in regards to like mental health and holistic wellness services, because I absolutely agree with you about, meeting clients, meeting people where they are. And a lot of times, they're coming into prison with trauma already, and like you talked about, is just compacted with them being incarcerated, and they don't have the services to really process it all. And at the end of the day, yes, they're still people and they need that space. And so do you have any recommendations like what that could look like, really, getting some of those services into place, especially for mothers and children, because yeah, it really impacts both parties in a major way.
And I'm an expert in certain things. I'm not all knowing, but and let me not forget, I'm so excited to hear so many of my sorors a part of this conversation too, not to deflect from any other sorority or anything like that, but thank you for that support. But with regard to your question, I think it's important for the mental health professionals to be in communication with state lawmakers and federal lawmakers, and whether you do it as an association, organization, group, and if you have a significant number of numbers who are members of these groups, that you need to hold these representatives accountable for dealing with the mental health issues. I will say, I'm sure in DLC systems, and it sounds like you're already knowledgeable of this, that it's not even being dealt with. Like a lot of people that are in our prison systems are there because there has not been any movement with providing mental health entities that could deal with them, because they don't necessarily need to be in a prison corrective environment. And who's to say that that environment is even knowledgeable to deal with what they actually truly need in order to be functional. And that setting could, and we're depending on the severity of mental health issue, that setting can be more harmful than even being out on the street in certain situations. So I would start with, having groups, organizations come together in their professions to hold these legislators accountable. And, they can, have, but you have to make sure that it's not just lip service that you're getting back, because you can demand that there be studies to do research to see, how many mental health incarcerated individuals are in the system, to find out what kind of resources are being made available to them from the beginning. And, I would even go even before incarceration. What can we do before incarceration, before a person is sentenced, for people to understand where they are now with the mental health issues, and would incarceration be more beneficial or harmful in those particular situations? So I know that wasn't a bunch of suggestions, but I would say start with holding people accountable. But we know those people that we hold accountable, especially when it comes to election time, they don't really want to deal with public safety, prison, incarcerated individuals. But, it's time. It's time. You have all these, Kim Kardashian and, President Trump can do this historic First Step Act legislation. And I think it's time that all political parties put that on their platform, and not having this tough on crime approach that you need to deal with the realities. Because trust and believe, as much as we incarcerate, I'm sure there's somebody that has a family member, friend that they know that's incarcerated, and they may feel it's unfortunate that they are, especially when we're talking about this opioid epidemic. And again, these are situations where people are using different, drugs to numb themselves. When there was the crack cocaine, epidemic, nobody cared about what was happening to those kids or how much time people were getting. But now we have this opioid epidemic and we have all these studies and analysis. Well, we need to carry it across the board when we talk about criminal justice and mental health as well.
Yes. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And as social workers, we have a responsibility to be a part of political action and to be a part of that change. So it's so important, that we also reposition ourselves to be able to help write policy or help to change and reshape those policies. Our next question, and we have about 4 minutes and we'll wrap up and I'll pass it on to our co-chairs. The next question is from Jeremy Burrich, and please forgive me if I mispronounced your last name. Jeremy.
Jeremy, are you there?
Yes, sorry.
No worries.
As a social worker, if you feel that the state boards of social work, such as Alabama Board of Social Work Examiners, should kind of practice what we teach regarding licensing of formerly incarcerated individuals as social workers. As it is now, if you have a criminal history and you are looking to become a social worker, you must write, kind of a synopsis of your situation and send it to the board for licensing. And it's kind of at their discretion if you're, if you're able to sit for licensure. And I was kind of curious what your thoughts were regarding that.
I think it's interesting that you posed that question. I mean, I think regardless if it's the state of Alabama or any state, I feel like there should be policy in place where a person can have their record expunged so they can move forward in working within certain professions. And, if as you're saying that, you can have a letter explaining your circumstance with the board, and you don't know who's making those decisions, and in certain situations, there could be, political affiliations where, one party has a certain belief or another party, has a more forgiving belief, and it all depends on who's in office at that particular time. And I think that there should be consistency in making these opportunities available. And I don't think, unless it's something that's just so egregious, but I do feel as if you should be allowed the opportunity to practice within certain professions after you've fulfilled, probation, and, you've gotten your rights restored, to vote. I do feel like people should not be hindered from being able to provide the best they can for their families. If you're not able to progress and move forward, then it's harder for you to be able to provide or to have a sustaining income if you don't have, certain licensures or opportunities to be able to practice in certain professions. So I do feel like you should be allowed to practice, and that you should talk to politicians, the people that make the decisions. And you said it's a state board, so talk to the people that make the decisions with the state board and figuring out what you need to do to practice. And, with my personal situation, I mean, it was a movement where, you put a story out there, and maybe it's important for you to highlight, impactful stories of people that have been denied, where you can create a visual and attach value to it as far as how this person is limited and they're not able to do XYZ, where you draw in more support in impacting people and helping them understand the necessity for change. So I hope that answers your question, but I definitely do feel like people who, have been incarcerated should not be limited from being able to advance themselves once they have served their debt to society.
Thank you for your response. This wraps up our Q&A. Again, Kemba, we thank you so much for being here with us today. I want to shift gears and turn it over to Nicholas Mitchell, who is a family member of Dr. Ethel Hall. Nicholas, if you would unmute your camera. Thank you for joining us today.
How are you? Afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank Ms. Pradia for inspiration. First off, hearing the stories and being present to hear to see through their eyes, if you will, for just a moment, is an undertaking that's not easily delivered, but you delivered it with breathtaking presence. And it is inspiring the work that you continue to do. I have a family member who was a part of the Virginia system as well. And it's challenging there. And he's finally come through his moments. Still a little work, but it's amazing to hear the work that you're doing that actually helps in that direction. And I want to give thanks to the School of Social Work at University of Alabama for yet another amazing presentation and remembrance. It caught me off guard seeing the video, but more so hearing my grandmother's voice, and I had to shift my eyes for a second because from my side, as I mentioned sometimes when I speak, I'm her grandson. So I got to be there from a child when she was first running for state board education. I remember walking through the neighborhoods and putting out flyers and going out with my grandfather and putting down the signs and going to countless moments where she spoke and she inspired and would teach. And it was a life-going thing for her. Even after she chose to retire, she basically didn't retire. She just got a little different with where she was, so she wasn't in the main line, but she was always present. With anything in a profession such as leadership and guidance, love and support, the one thing we can take away, since it is Black History Month, is that, as Frederick Douglass would say, struggle without it, there's no progress. Everything that we do, whether we are in the professional sense, family structure, support structure, everyone has a part to play. And staying vigilant to those parts is essential to help people grow and love and come out of it. Even after you're out of the trial, there's the healing. The family has to heal. The person has to heal. Healing isn't overnight. It's not over the course of days, weeks, or months. It's continuous. And you have to channel that energy, and channeling it as you have, Ms. Pradia, is a way of healing. But you not only healed yourself, you healed others along the way, which is just tremendous and highly underrated actually by some, because you stand out and be a limelight or a lighthouse beacon to show this is the way is not something everyone is willing to do. I believe my grandmother would have loved to have heard your story. I believe she would have been tremendously touched by this story. It's moving. But another thing that comes to my mind is also another quote. I believe it's about fear having two meanings. You can forget everything and run, or you can face everything and rise. A lot of people, when they get out of circumstances, choose to do the first one, forget it and run, because it was so traumatic, so time consuming, so much loss. Other people choose, as you did, the very few, as they call, like in the military, the proud, the few, the many. You choose to rise above the circumstances and stand forward as hope. Hope is what the world needs most. the world suffers on not having hope, suffers not from not having enough love, conviction, or passion to do what is needed. More people honestly sit down and take a, stand back approach, when really, if you have it to bring to the table, to strengthen, to love, support, to build, to find the resources to apply, you may have this much of a resource, but someone else has this much. Put it together. Each one helps one to save another. The systems that we have in place for the incarceration system have long needed overhauling. Everyone knows, but no one is actually stepping up in all the right places. Just as well as with social work. Social work is an essential part to helping a lot of different areas. It touches so many places, and it's behind the scenes and people don't realize just how much work is done. But I want to say thank you to the School of Social Work, to everyone that played a part in this, to just the love and support you all give. And my family, education has always been a tried and true. My mother, who is not here with us due to health, she finished out with her doctorate in education. My grandmother, and proudly to say my better half to be, is also about to put in about a year and a half, maybe a little more, will complete her doctorate in education. She's also currently an educator. So when it's a goal to step out and help, that's a unit thing, even in family. When I say healing is a village process. If the village doesn't know the problem, they can't help the villager. And it has to be extended out beyond ourselves. Sometimes we have to adopt other villages and say, hey, I got a fix for something you all been dealing with. How about we sit down and have a talk? Talking is the main step. Without communication, you can't make progress. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. I am tremendously moved by what was shared here today. And I just want to say thank you for the gift that you have bestowed upon everyone else, Ms. Pradia, by sharing your story and by the lives you continue to come forward to try to help and assist with your efforts. Y'all have a great day. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mitchell. We are so grateful for the continued opportunity to celebrate your father's esteemed legacy. And we always appreciate your support and being here. Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials. And please know that our thoughts are with your mother, and we're wishing her all of the best. I'm Leah Cheatham, and I am one of the co-chairs of our diversity committee. I'll pass to Avni to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Avni Shah. I'm an associate professor in the School of Social Work, and I've had the pleasure of being on the diversity committee organizing this, but I want to reach out to everyone who helped make this happen. This was a huge team effort, and we are so appreciative of our speaker, of all of our amazing students. Lasharia and Amy put together that presentation. It probably took them 12 hours for the in memoriam video. We want to thank our other, and many different places. The WOW program, their students have been able to watch while Kemba was speaking, and Ms. Pradia Smith was speaking, and I'm so grateful that they were able to participate. I'm also appreciative of Women and Gender Services, who has been a partner in this endeavor, and so many other people that are part of our diversity committee that spent countless hours to put this together. And the prison arts program, we really appreciate the work you all are doing. We appreciate everything that you've been able to do. Our Chief Diversity Officer and the African American Gospel Choir, that's part of UA, who opened it up and will also close us out today. And in addition, we want to make an announcement that we will have a follow-up to this. We're very grateful for DYS and the WOW program, who will be talking about juvenile justice and how what social workers in the juvenile justice and what work we're doing in that system. And that will be March 9th for the Noontime Knowledge Series. We will have two social workers present on that topic. So we'll get a little bit deeper dive after what Kemba's talked to us about the correctional system. And we will get to continue thinking about how we can make a difference in this area. Leah, would you like to add anything else I may have missed?
Sure. I just wanted to specifically thank some of the program members that we haven't had a chance to thank explicitly, including Elizabeth Prophet, our BSW student and USWO president. Thank you, Elizabeth. Dean Hatcher, thank you so much for joining us and for welcoming us to this program. We'd like to thank our students, Edson Chapalo, Ashia Winston, and Kirsten Taylor for presenting the history of this event for those who are unfamiliar with it. We'd like to thank our PhD student and committee member, Angie Smith, for introducing Ms. Kemba Smith Pradia. We really appreciate everybody's efforts, including Professor Sharon Wilkes for hosting our Q&A, which was just a wonderful experience. We really enjoyed the opportunity to hear these questions. And Kemba, we loved hearing all of your really honest and truthful responses. You've called us to action, and we appreciate you being here to do that. I also just wanted to explicitly thank all of our committee members, because without our diversity committee members, this event would not be possible. That includes Mr. Charles Banks, Edson Chapalo, Kimberly Gibson, John Gilmer, Darcel Green, Lindsay Johnson, Mallory Porch, Angie Smith, Shayla Smith, Karen Starks, Peggy Trosper, Carrie Turner, and Sharon Wilkes. We thank everybody for their efforts in making this event possible each year, including this year, our 33rd event. And most importantly, we want to thank everyone who joined us, including our students, staff, faculty, alumni, and community members. We appreciate your support for this event continuing into the future, we hope. And we really hope that today's program has inspired you to join Ms. Smith Pradia in reimagining the criminal justice system and shifting the narrative, and also join our School of Social Work in imagining a more socially just future. And as Avni already shared, we'll close out with the performance from the University of Alabama Afro-American Gospel Choir performing Jesus Promised.
And before that starts, I just wanted to say that there in the chat, if you need CEUs, there should be a place for you all to click. I think Peggy Trosper is going to put that in our chat so that you can collect your CEUs. And we also want to thank Nicholas Finch, who did all of our advertising and marketing. So we missed you. We really do appreciate you. So thank you all so much. And I hope you enjoyed the last efforts by our African American Gospel Choir to lead us out. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, all. This concludes today's program. We'll look forward to seeing you next year.
Thank you again, everyone. It's a pleasure to meet everyone. Have a beautiful rest of the day. Hopefully the end Friday has a really happy note for everyone else.
It's tradition to stay for the after party. To celebrate.
I was trying to put people in the waiting room. Did I miss anybody?
Yes.
I think we're still recording, so I don't know if we should stop. Let's go. Do we stop?